Good morning, everyone. This week in Finding Jesus Under the Sea, our sea animal is a jellyfish. And I have this little tiny stuffed animal jellyfish here. And a jellyfish is very floppy. This is probably a little more stiff than what a real jellyfish would be. They don't have bones. They don't have anything to make them stiff. They're very floppy and they move throughout the ocean very smoothly. Today's Bible story is about three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were not floppy like a jellyfish. They stood up for what was right and made good choices and stood up for God, and even though it was scary, they stood up for what was right. I'm going to read that story from the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and I'm going to start with verse 8. It goes like this. Then some Babylonians came up to the king. They began speaking against the men of Judah. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Our king live forever. Our king, you gave a command. You said that everyone would hear the horns, lyres, zithers, harps, pipes, and all other musical instruments. They would have to bow down and worship the gold statue. Anyone who wouldn't do this was to be thrown into a blazing furnace. Our king, there are some men of Judah who did not pay attention to your order. You made them important officers in the area of Babylon. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue that you have set up." Verse 13, Nebuchadnezzar became very angry. He called for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So those men were brought to the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you do not serve my gods? And is it true that you did not worship the gold statue I have set up? Now you will hear the sound of the horns, flutes, lyres, zithers, harps, pipes, and all the other musical instruments. And you must be ready to bow down and worship the statue that I made. That will be good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown quickly into a blazing furnace. Then no God will be able to save you from my power." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king. They said, "Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves to you. You can throw us in the blazing furnace. The God we serve is able to save us from the furnace and your power. If he does this, it is good. But even if God does not save us, we want you, our king, to know this. We will not serve your gods. We will not worship the gold statue you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king told the soldiers to throw them into the blazing furnace. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up and thrown into the blazing furnace. They were still wearing their robes, trousers, and turbans and other clothes. The king was very angry. When he gave the command, the furnace was made very hot. The fire was so hot that the flames killed the strong soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego there. Firmly tied, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was very surprised and jumped to his feet. He asked the men who advised him, "Didn't we tie up only 3 men? Didn't we throw them into the fire?" They answered, "Yes, our king." The king said, "Look, I see 4 men. They were walking around in the fire. They are not tied up and they are not burned. The fourth man looks like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar went to the opening of the blazing furnace. He shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out! Servants of the Most High God, come here!" So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When they came out, the princes, assistant governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies. Their hair was not burned. Their robes were not burned. And they didn't even smell like smoke. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their God has sent his angel to save his servants from the fire." These three men trusted their God. They refused to obey my command, and they were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god other than their own. So I now make this law. The people of any nation or language must not say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Anyone who does will be torn apart, and his house will be torn into a pile of stones. No other God can save his people like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the area of Babylon. That story is a little bit longer, but it really shows how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood up to the king and said, "What you're asking us to do isn't right. We only worship God. We don't worship anything else." And they stood up and said, "We will do what is right no matter what." And they said, "Our God can protect us." And they kind of said, even if he doesn't, we trust God and trust to do what is right. So this week, let's think about ways that we can do what is right and trust God, even if it's hard. And instead of being floppy like a jellyfish, we can be strong and trust God, even in times where we have to stand up and do what's right. Have a great week.